Mr. President, in absentia, and the entire Radical New Bar, distinguished members of the bar, students of justice, fellow citizens, friends and frenemies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I saw some people giggling, but yes, you cannot be in a gathering and only expect friends, so we have to recognize all people. Today, ladies and gentlemen, I'm deeply honored by the invitation to address this very important gathering of the land friends. Today actually becomes even more significant following the passing of a giant of constitutional law in Uganda, Professor George Wilson Kanyehamba, a man who has championed the rule of law in Uganda at great personal risk and sacrifice. In fact, today everything that I want to say to you can be simply summed up by a call to the lawyers of this generation to simply emulate the life, the works, the words and actions of Professor Kanyehamba. He was a man willing to sacrifice everything, including friends, status, material benefits, everything for the sake of advancing constitutionalism and the rule of law in Uganda. May the Almighty God receive his gentle soul in heaven. Friends, as a young boy growing up in Kamocha, it was always my dream to become a lawyer, because apart from the poverty, ignorance and disease that are always the major problems in the ghettos, in our ghetto there was one prevalent problem, and that was injustice. And I always thought to myself as a child growing up that I would be better positioned to address that injustice if I became a lawyer. But again, like many children in Uganda with big dreams and limited means, when I missed out on government sponsorship, that dream died, at least for a while. In the year 2000, studying law on private sponsorship was simply out of question for a person like myself from a background that I was coming from, because the cost was just prohibitive. Tuition fees for just one semester in law school when I joined Magere was enough to buy a plot of land in Nasser. Yes, only the rich could afford it. And what did I have to do? Is to take another choice that I could afford. Well, thank God, many years later, when life allowed me the means and time, my dream resurrected. And in my 40s, last year, I graduated from law school. I didn't expect you to clap. I expected you to say, oh, sorry. The only person I expected to clap was Council Mabirizi. Friends, for me, that actually was the first major realistic encounter with social justice, or rather social injustice. Because yes, while government sponsorship should indeed be reserved for the brightest amongst us, but even those students who come from remote districts with limited facilities and therefore not able to compete fairly with others, especially those in town, should at least be presented with an opportunity for them to pursue their dreams. After all, isn't it the duty of government to subsidize for their citizens and make dreams achievable for even the commonest of their citizens? Because you see, when the rich are the ones that can afford to dream, and the poor can even not dare to aspire, then society ceases to be society, it becomes just a market. Many dreams of the underprivileged people are destroyed in their infancy, and the society is not a society that every citizen can be proud of. So that brings me to the question, what then is social justice? What is it? We all define it in different ways. But in my humble view, ladies and gentlemen, I feel like social justice at its core is the principle that every person, regardless of their status, regardless of their background, deserves and indeed achieves equal chances, equal opportunity, equal rights, and equal protection by the law. Unfortunately, today, in this nation that we call home, that is actually not the case. In Uganda, the law is nothing more than the paper on which it is written. The regime of the day will twist the law to its interest. It will use it as a weapon, just like any other weapon at its disposal. If it serves them, then they will praise the law, they will honor it, and they will sing it. And that is most especially when it serves them to silence critics and to keep political opponents in prison. Whenever the law stands in their way, like it did during the constitutional term limits and the age limit, they conveniently kick it down the drain. In Uganda today, the 48-hour rule, as stated by the Constitution, is nothing to be considered. They abduct citizens and they even boast about it. They keep them in incommunicado detention for days, weeks, months, and sometimes even years. And then, at their convenience, they present them to the courts of law, and nothing is done. Now, this, ladies and gentlemen, speaks of two ironies. The first irony is that the person presiding over all this impunity, and that's General Museveni, while he was addressing this very law society that I'm addressing today, on the 25th of February 1987, he spoke so passionately. He said the law can be manipulated against the people. He said, and I quote, "Depending on the nature of the state in a given society, the law can be an instrument of oppression and exploitation, or an instrument of social justice and progress. Law," he went on and said, "law is not always synonymous with justice. It can be, but also it may not be. What is legal is not necessarily just. Law can be used by the strong against the weak. It can be used by the rich against the poor, and it can be used by the minority against the majority." That was General Museveni on the 25th of February 1987. And yet today, in defense of the regime, you will find many outstanding lawyers saying, but that is what the law says, without even wondering or asking themselves whether that law is just or unjust. And the second irony, and perhaps the most painful one, is that most of these abuses, most of these wrongdoings, most of this arm twisting of the law are facilitated by lawyers. I mean, if I may ask, who drafts the oppressive laws like the UPDF Amendment Act of 2025 and the Public Order Management Act? Lawyers. Who sanctions fake charges against regime critics? Lawyers. Who prosecutes citizens like Kizza Besigye in complete violation of due process? Lawyers. Who remands victims like Eddie Mutwe, torture victims, clearly tortured people, who reminds them to prison? People like Eddie Mutwe, people like Akwenza Lukaira Basaija, who sends them to prison instead of sending them to the hospital? Lawyers. Ask yourself, who has frustrated our electoral justice system in Uganda to the extent that it's clear that overturning a presidential election in Uganda is harder than a camel passing through the needle, the eye of a needle? That is lawyers. Today in Uganda, those who steal taxpayers' money are protected by the criminal justice system, while those who protest against them are punished. They are abducted, they are tortured, they are even raped in custody. Today, Uganda, and indeed the criminal justice system in Uganda, is teaching our children that it is okay to steal, but it is criminal to speak out against theft. The Supreme Court of Uganda, the highest court of the land, passes a judgment ordering the state to stop trying civilians in military courts, and the regime simply ignores the decision, a decision of the highest court of the land, and business continues as usual. Elections are rigged with impunity. Petitions challenging the rigging are decided even before they are heard. Now this is even more painful. A justice of the Supreme Court had to run out of the country for fear of her life just because she dared to decide our petition judiciously. Her crime was stating that it was unreasonable to expect me to collect evidence and prepare my petition on time when I was under house arrest for more than half the time provided by the Constitution. Not even to say that that time is enough, but for more than half of the time I was in detention. And she mentioned it, and for that she is in exile. When we complain about all these illegalities, the courts are very quick to invoke the political question doctrine. Now, when courts choose doctrine over truth and theory over justice, then we find ourselves back to 1966. In 1966, the court was facing a violent overthrow of the 1962 Constitution. It chose political expediency over constitutional legitimacy. You all remember that in the case of Uganda versus Commission of Prisons, ex parte Matovu. The ruling in that case became the first post-colonial excuse, and every regime has used that to justify the using of guns to either silence or rewrite the law. Friends, you remember some 10 years ago, Professor Lokonyango wrote, and I agreed with him. He wrote about this case and said, in many ways, this case was both an ending and the beginning of Uganda. A very dangerous precedent was set, and it has continued to be an excuse to justify military takeovers and fraudulent elections to the present day. Now, another even more disturbing excuse which continues to impede our democracy is the so-called substantiality test. Under Section 61 of the Presidential Elections Act, the election of a presidential candidate can only be annulled upon proof, among others, that there was non-compliance with the law governing presidential elections, and that, and please listen to this part very carefully, and that compliance affected the election result in a substantial manner. What do they mean, substantial manner? What exactly do they mean? You will note that in all the past presidential election petitions, the Supreme Court of Uganda has always conveniently used this so-called substantiality test as an excuse to overlook the proven and glaring vote rigging together with the electoral violence by the military and the police. All that has always been done in favor of General Museveni, but the court has always overlooked that. Even when they know that every single act of rigging or every irregularity, however big or however small it is, was done precisely to alter the result of the election. And also knowing very clearly that no one rigs the election just for the sake of rigging. They rig it to win. But again, they always bring the substantiality test as an excuse. And they always overlook the facts to decide what they want to decide. Friends, lawyers should have the moral courage to call it exactly what it is: judicial cowardice, dressed as legal doctrine. Ladies and gentlemen, that judicial cowardice is what has failed our democracy, and it has kept our country moving in circles. It ignores the reality that in Uganda, electoral malpractice happens throughout the entire electoral process, from pre-electoral times to post-electoral times. I mean, you see abductions, you see torture of opponents, you see gerrymandering, you see internet blackouts, you see military deployments, you see open briberies, etc., etc. You don't just see the ballot stuffing and rigging on the day of the election. It happens long before, it happens during, and it happens long after. But the courts of law have always closed their eyes to that. If we had the rule of law in Uganda worth its name, then this was supposed to shake the entire legitimacy of the entire electoral process, but it does not. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court judges always choose to favor the regime just because they feel safe doing that than upholding the rule of law. So, dear land friends, I think it is high time that lawyers stop acting like they are safe in this burning house called Uganda. Friends, you are not safe. In a burning house, in a sinking boat, nobody is safe. So don't even lie to yourself. We are here, but I look around and see that all of you lawyers are just as vulnerable as the ghetto people where I come from. Right before me, Council Mudiobole there was abducted and kept incommunicado for almost a week. He is a lawyer. That alone is supposed to speak to all of us, ladies and gentlemen. Peter Chibirango was a lawyer, but when he walked into a reckless community, he was suspected to be a thief, and he was beaten to death. Ivan Bakesiga was a successful lawyer in his own right, but when illness came, he was as vulnerable as anybody else. He tried to fundraise, but eventually he died. All of us, I mean, who does not remember Bob Kasango? Yes, he was controversial, but he was a very good lawyer, and he was a very wealthy man by any standards. But he died in prison, denied bail, and by extension denied the medical attention that he so badly needed. He passed away. Now, I want all of you present here today and those watching us online to ask yourself that if Mudiobole, a renowned lawyer, if Bob Kasango, if Ivan, if Peter, if they're not safe, why do you think you are safe? Why do you think you're any different? Now, please remember that no one is safe in a lawless society. Not even you, the lawyers. You may have degrees. You may have titles. You may be successful. You may be well known. But when this regime crushes constitutionalism completely, you are the next that they're going to come for. I promise you that. If Uganda collapses, as we all see, it surely will, if we don't do what we must do. Every one of us is going to be as vulnerable. If the country burns, it will burn you as hot as it burns a border rider in Chifumbira or in Chebando or in Kamocha. You're not going to be any different. So, my dear land friends, my humble request is that you join the rest of the citizens in saving this country. You lawyers of all citizens best understand the problem of Uganda. And by that, you can be part of the solution if you choose to be. And that way, we shall all be safe. Because like we continuously say, all of us will be safe or no one will be safe. I want you to remember, ladies and gentlemen, that history is calling. Different generations of lawyers in Uganda have always risen to the occasion whenever history has called. We all remember that it was lawyers, including the now gone Justice Kanyehamba. It was lawyers that were the driving force in the Moshi Conference, which culminated into the liberation of Uganda from the Amin dictatorship. And yes, it was lawyers like Counsel Simon Juba, who was once president of this very society, the Uganda Law Society, that rose to the occasion, closed his chambers, folded his sleeves, and joined the rest of the citizens in the 80s to try and liberate this country and return the rule of law that he so dearly believed in. He did not sit in his chambers when history was calling for his involvement. He got involved, and you too can get involved. I want you to know, friends, that while you're young, while you might look at yourself as unready, please be reminded that we are the Kanyemahambas of this generation. We are the Samunjubas of this generation. Do not doubt your abilities. There's no other important time to take action than now. Allow me to also remind you, dear land friends, that this right here is the most consequential time in history of Uganda. This right here is the most effective time for you to get involved. This is the most interesting time to be alive and to be mature and to be in this room this time. The second best, no, the best was yesterday, the second best is now. But let's consider it as the best and then do what we must do. I'll also borrow some words from the great author called Frantz Fanon. He said, every generation must discover its mission and then decide to either pursue and fulfill that mission or betray it. I have no doubt that you lawyers here have already discovered your mission, and the world is looking at you to watch you either pursue that mission and fulfill it or betray that mission for convenience. The ball is right in your hands. Friends, you are the hope of this generation. You are the lawyers of this generation. When history is being written, your name will be among the lawyers that were present in 2025 when everything is going south. So we are already having a responsibility and a burden on our shoulders. I want to tell you, friends, that it is not enough for you lawyers to protect your contracts. It is not enough for you to represent banks and big businesses while you're ignoring the political prisoners. Some lawyers say they are neutral. They say the law is not political. But the law has always been political. I mean, it is political when Bobi Wine is taken to prison for putting on red. It is political when Justice Chisache runs to exile just because she ruled against the regime. So lawyers must pick a side because justice in itself is political. And in a time of injustice, neutrality is complicity. In this time, lawyers must pick a side, either the side of the law or the side of lawlessness. You cannot stay in the middle. I want to pause and I want to request most of you, in fact all of us, to pause for a second and imagine this. The Attorney General, the chambers of the Attorney General of this country, a man who brought the UPDF Act Amendment of 2025 to drag civilians back into military tribunals. His chambers share a wall with these very headquarters of Uganda Law Society. Please pause and think about that. I'll say that again. The private chambers of the Attorney General, of the man, the Attorney General, Chiriwa Chiwanuka, the man who presented the UPDF Amendment Act of 2025 to drag civilians back to military courts. His chambers are sharing a wall with the Uganda Law Society office where we are now. And his partner in those chambers is not just any other lawyer. He is the son-in-law of General Museveni, the man at the helm of this regime. So now that is legal political marriage standing just meters away from us. Just pause and imagine that for a second. The politics is in the law, and the law is in the politics. They are both mixed and mingled. And yet some lawyers say they are neutral. They say the law is not political. And meanwhile, the president of the Uganda Law Society, Council Isaac Semakadde, is in exile, largely because of his opinions. Now that is supposed to tell you everything that you need to know about this system. That even the society that is meant to defend lawyers cannot defend itself. And by the way, friends, don't get me wrong. I don't want to come off as if I'm pretending not to understand where we are. I know we're not living in France. I know we're living in Uganda under General Museveni. So, I understand. Don't get me wrong. I understand the complexities of legal practice under dictatorship. I know that every lawyer here knows about the fate of the former Chief Justice of Uganda, Ben Chiwanuka. I know that all lawyers in Uganda know that he was picked from his chambers and he has never been seen again up to the present day. So I can imagine the fear in the activist lawyers as they go about their work under this dictatorship. But again, friends, we must face it, because we cannot just resign to fate as if there's nothing that we can do about it. There's definitely something that we can do about it. If anything, it calls for us to be even more bold and more determined and face it with even more courage, because if lawyers don't speak up, then who will speak up against lawlessness? I recognize among you many noble lawyers that have not shied away whenever justice has called them. I want to thank you. I salute the legal team of the National Unity Platform for rising to the occasion and putting their fear aside to defend our members and our supporters and our fellow citizens against oppression and injustice. I salute the relentless work of lawyers like Counsel Aaron Chiza. I salute Counsel Ladarius Wakafuzi. I salute Counsel George Musisi and many other lawyers whose practice has become synonymous with activism despite the risks. You guys are not just lawyers, you're patriots. And I want you to know that we hold you in the highest regard. Thank you very much. We all are strong and continue to be strong because of your example. I will also thank some of our brothers in the legal fraternity, people like Counsel Mabirizi. Thank you for always being a problem. Because you always challenge us to be the better versions of ourselves. I'm glad that none of you live in us forever. And to you now, the lawyers, the students of justice, and the citizens of Uganda, I say this. Please look back at the different generations of lawyers throughout Uganda's constitutional and political history, and please reflect on what they did when the nation was losing its way. Then pause a little and ask yourself, will your future self look back with pride to your present self? Will your future self be proud of the decisions and the position and the stand that you took today? That's a question that you don't have to answer right now, but I hope it's a question that will keep lingering in your mind. My brothers and sisters, it is a moral challenge to all of us lawyers. It is a moral challenge because if the law speaks, then lawyers must be the voice through which that law speaks. We must be the conscience that refuses to go numb. We must be the dream that refuses to die. We must be the truth that refuses to hide behind neutrality and technicality. Uganda is not short of lawyers. You are many, we are many. But Uganda is short of courageous lawyers. Lawyers who refuse to sell their values for convenience and for comfort. Lawyers who understand that justice is not a job description. Justice is a calling. If the law is being used as a weapon against the people, then let the lawyers be the shield. If the Constitution is under attack, let the lawyers be the defenders of the Constitution. As a lawyer, you should be found standing at all times. You should be found standing morally in the courtroom. You should be found standing in the streets. You should be found standing in history. And if your children and grandchildren are to ask one day, your answer should be that when that time came, I stood on the right side of history. Whether or not that will be your answer to your grandchildren is for you now to decide. I thank you very much, friends, for listening to me, and God bless you.
All right, another round of applause for the President. Thank you so much.